Okay, so let's, for those of you who don't remember everything, let's recap. So we started off, again, by noting that even though the Gemara obligates you to light a menorah at every entrance because of Chshad, because of concern that someone will look and think that you didn't fulfill the mitzvah, and you would have expected it to invoke the normal psukim that we invoke in these contexts, Yitzim Nikim and the like, all those that were in Bava Batra and in Shkalim, the Gemara does not. The Gemara instead invokes this very bizarre limud from Peah, which, as we noted, is a philosophical rationale for a legal reality. But the legal reality is not in question, right? The reason that you give Peah in the corner, so that's what the halacha is. This is just a philosophical reason, so to apply it here seems odd. So that was our starting point for asking the question of, okay, well, what exactly do we mean when we say you have to light a second menorah mishum chshad? Do we mean that the general obligation of chshad, the general values encompassed by that phrase, play out in the halacha of Chanukah in the sense that they make you light in every possible direction? Or do we say that no, there's a universal value of Chshad, but in Chanukah, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a localized halacha. Just like Peah, we're saying this is the law, and we're asking what motivated the law, but once we have it, it's an expression of Hadlakat Nerot Chanukah, it's internal to the takana, so too here. And as we said, it does seem to be hinted at that the latter is the case from the fact that we quote the Peah case where indeed this is a rationale for an intrinsic part of the law rather than an extrinsic reality, right? An external reality. So we said, well, what would emerge from that? So one possible implication might be bracha, right? Where the Ran claims, look, you don't make a bracha. And the Ran seems to say, well, because it's only Chshad, this isn't Hadlakat Nerot. This is something else, right? This is external, right? This is a general concern, and therefore it doesn't warrant a bracha. On the other hand, the Rashba says, in general, whenever Chazal institute something, for whatever reason they do, so you make a bracha. And from that, the Pri Chadash places the Rashba at odds with the Ran. Now, based on that, so it could be that the Rashba simply thinks that it's external to the halacha of Chanukah, and nevertheless, you make a bracha. Because whenever the rabbis say do anything, it takes on the formal rule of a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and you make a bracha, and that's all there is to it. Alternatively, we noted that maybe even the Rashba would say not all things are created equal. That the cases he brings up of Ben Pakua and the Chala case are both cases where Midaraita, you don't have to do the mitzvah, but Midarabanan, we make you do shchita. You do the Maisa mitzvah shchita on an object which admittedly biblically does not need it. Same with the Chala case. So maybe there he would say, that's because internal to the halacha, we've created a chiyuv shchita midirabanan. We've created a chiyuv of Rosh Hashanah midirabanan. If that's what the Rashba thinks, so maybe even the Rashba would entertain cases in which the concern is external and you wouldn't make a bracha. And maybe Chanukah is like that, like the Ran, or maybe he sees Chanukah the same way as he sees shchita, and he sees so within the Rashba, you could either say you make a bracha because you always make a bracha whenever the rabbis say do anything, or he would say this is internal to the halacha, just like shchita and Rosh Hashanah. Yet another possibility that we raised, and this was Adam in the name, right, essentially channeling the Masad HaMelech, which is maybe you have to take a different direction here, which is maybe this is indeed intrinsic. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that. There were those who felt that you wouldn't make a bracha, but not because fundamentally this isn't part of the takana, but because you were already yotzei with the bracha on the first Hadlakat Nerot, right? So that's a way of saying, on the one hand, it is integrated into the mitzvah, but you still don't need a bracha, but for technical reasons, meaning you already had a bracha. So we said two other test cases to this would be, one is whether when you perform the Hadlakat Nerot Mishum Chshad, is there a value of doing Mahadrin Min Mahadrin, right? Or do you just need to suffice with the bare minimum? Which again, if it's part of the takana, so then presumably whatever you do for one, you do for the other, and there's a value of Mahadrin Min Mahadrin, even for the one that's just there Mishum Chshad. And the second aspect would be Hana'am and Haor. Right? That if it's defined as Hadlakat Erev Chanukah, you're not allowed to benefit from the light. But if it's defined as candles that are there Mishum Chshad, so you probably can use the light. I mean, maybe you'll say you can't because of Chshad and Chshad, right? Maybe. But less likely. And then we suggested, well, why would you say it's internal to the takana? So possibility one, and there were two variants of this that Adam discussed yesterday, were, well, since the entire takana of Erev Chanukah is because of Persumei Nisa, so you could put this in two ways. Either every time I light, it's a fulfillment of Persumei Nisa, whether or not it's the formal obligation of Hadlakat Nerot, right? It always integrates. So the more I light, the more people see, the more publicize the miracle, the more I makayim the mitzvah, right? And svars like this, by the way, are raised by poskim who say that you're allowed to make a bracha at a Hanukkah party, even though that's not your main Hadlakat Nerot, right? The poskim who say you could light say, well, it's Persumei Nisa at the end of the day, so it fulfills the mitzvah. Not everyone agrees to that, but the poskim who say things like that. The alternative is to say the negative side, which is if Persumei Nisa is the motivation for Hanukkah, so Marat Ayin Chshad is particularly invidious, right, when it comes to that goal. Because, right, if the goal is to make people talk about the miracle and see that I believe in the miracle, if people see what I'm doing and say, aha, he didn't light, he doesn't have faith in the miracle, it's particularly counterproductive in the case of Persumei Nisa-esque mitzvah. Right, so those would be two variations on the rationale of why this should be internal to the takana. Yes, Ezra. Good. So Ezra caught me there. So Ezra's saying, but isn't Persumei Nisa the miracle happened? I'm not sure. Right? There is reason to believe, it could be that it just means the miracle happened, but there's good reason to believe that that's not the case. I could give you the long form of this or the short form of it, but Rabbeinu Yonah, Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah in Brachot, in the beginning of the 5th parak, does seem to indicate that Persumei Nisa can be accomplished by a state of being. Right, that it's less about what you're being mefarsim and more about your faith, right? That the act is supposed to indicate something about where you stand in terms of your attitude towards the miracle. He says that in generic context, not talking about any specific Persumei Nisa, but you have indications elsewhere that this might be the case in Svarim that you probably have never seen or heard of. But there is an implication of this in the Tanaim v'Amoraim and Yechusei Tanaim v'Amoraim of Rav Yosan ben Kalonimus, one of the clearly best-known medieval Balei Tosfot. He's known for several things. He's known for writing this very interesting work, which is organized not by topic, but by who said it in Chazal. So it's very hard to find anything. And also over the fact that he couldn't smell. Yes, exactly. It's a Nazmik. So do I, or as he calls it, I'm deaf in the nose. Yes, exactly. Nose blindness, whatever. Yeah. So the Rivak has in the Mordechai. The Rivak asked the Mordechai whether he was allowed to say the bracha of Besamim at Havdalah because he couldn't smell. So that is the tshuva that is quoted. Well, I'll be honest that most people didn't know about this Mordechai until COVID, when one of the main symptoms is losing smell, and suddenly everybody is quoting, aha, there is a Rivak. Thank you. I'm glad. There's a Rivak. Now you all know there is a Rivak. That the Rivak had permanent smelling problems. Yeah, we got it. Most poskim, by the way, say that you can't say the bracha on Besamim. Not everybody, admittedly. There are outliers. There is, if I remember correctly, Yosef Ometz of the Chidah who suggests that that's not the case. But okay, it's not a majority view. Maybe it's Yaakov also. At least two Achronim. Anyways, fine. That is where we left off. But now I want to push it farther. And where's Rami? Rami! Right? This is, Rami's been waiting 3 days for his moment, and now it's his moment. What? Land, yeah. It's not actually land, but close enough. Right? Yes, Ezra.
Yeah, if we did it like the light, like people like move out, then you don't have to light it.
That's what I want to move to right now.
Right. So
I want to move to that right now, yeah?
possibly you'd be able to say that you can just put like instead of like lighting the like candle or whatever in the door, you can light one candle in one door and have a half brick candle in the other one.
Very clever. Or a sign that says, I lit on the other side of the door, right? That way, right? Just a neon sign that says to see Chanukah candles, right? Straight and left. Yeah, all these very fancy lumdish things. Or not lumdish things. Okay. Okay, well, fine. Let's start the analysis here. Okay, guys, here's the problem. Jonathan, he's getting a tissue. Fine. Okay, let's give it a minute because this is important. If you miss this minute, you'll be lost for a bit. So, okay. So, Adam, I'm going to put you on the spot. Let's say that Adam is correct and the Masad Melech is correct. Namely, that the reason that we are more demanding in terms of Chshad in Hadlakat Nerot is because of Persumei Nisa. And that gives us more reason to think that in one of the ways that we've talked about, Chshad integrates into the mitzvah of Persumei Nisa itself. Let's say that. So the problem then becomes the Shvus Yaakov. Right? Which is once you open that door, once you open that Pandora's box, so you have to ask the question, which is, does that mean that any possible chshad, any possible concern that would emerge in the context of Adlakat Erev Chanukah, you're obligated to dispel, right? Because if you take that very expansive formulation, right, that Chshad is integral to the very takon of Adlakat Nerot because Persumei Nisa, because we have to make sure that everybody knows that we're publicizing the miracle, etc. And we have to avoid Chshad because that's like a negative Persumei Nisa. So then, that you would expect that to express itself in cases that are not only lighting in the second direction. And this was the assumption of the Shvut Yaakov when he asked his question. Who is the Shvut Yaakov? Oh, come on, guys. You knew I was going to ask that. You always know I'm going to ask that. Well, okay, take a wild guess what his first name is. Yaakov. Okay, very good. His first name is Yaakov. Very good. What's his last name? Reicher. Very good. Yes, Yaakov ben Yosef Reicher. There you go. He is a halachist born in Prague, spent most of his time in Austria, latter half of the 17th, former half of the 18th century. Okay, Rabbi Yaakov Reicher. So, and who is his father? Now, why do I ask you who his father is? Why does that matter? Because this tshuva is from his father, right? Hine, if you missed the first sentence, which is Hine Shamati V'Shem Adoni Mori Vira, right? Mori Virabi Natre Rachmana Uparke. He quotes, right? Right? What? Yeah, well, it's either his Rebbe or his father. That's either Avi. It might just be his Rebbe. It's either his father or his Rebbe. I'm not sure. Right? That could be Adoni Mori V'Rabi Natre Rachmana Uparke. Nun Reish Vav is Natre Rachmana Uparke. May God protect him. It's not. Maybe that's just his Rebbe. I don't know. Maybe it's his Rebbe. Yeah. Anyways, so here was the question at any rate. Misha kava lo ner Chanukah. Af shekayim alan kavta in zakuk la mikol makom tzarich lachniach sham alot makom hanoter miner Chanukah. So we had this very surprising shita. What was it? And even though we paskin kavta in zakuk la, right, that if the candle goes out, you don't have to relight it. What did his Rebbe tell him he had to do? You got to leave the burnt out menorah in place. Why? So that people won't suspect you of having not lit your menorah. What's his proof? Right, he was asked about this. Do you have to do this? Where's that from? So what did he answer? What? So he says, Tshuva, mishum Chshad. He said it's logical because of Chshad. And what's his proof that we care about Chshad in Chanukah? Our case, thank you. That's not surprising. Now he says, if you just skip around here a little bit to the right, he says, "Da'aft ikal meimar dedin ze gufa chedushu mi chedush lo yalfinan ki havu delo lo sifala." And even though you might have said it's a chiddush, so don't add to a chiddush. Havu delo lo sifala. What's havu delo lo sifala? Yeah, so it's a phrase in rabbinic literature that means I don't really understand the first case, so please don't expand it. Right? Havud lo lo tevala, which is I got it. I'm done with the first case. I got it. I don't really understand it, but please don't make it worse than it already is. Right? Havud lo lo tevala. Please just don't add to it. So he said, maybe you would say, don't add to it. But he said, that's not true, because the Beis Yosef puts our Gemara in conversation with the Shul case, which we'll come back to. Right? You guys saw the Shul case? Okay? Right? Of the person walking behind the Shul. You're not supposed to walk behind the Shul, because you might, right? People might think you're ignoring Shul, but if there's a second entrance, we let you. And the Beis Yosef says, well, why by Shul do we tell you because there's a second entrance we're not worried, and here we are worried? So we'll come back to that in a minute. But his point is that this seems to be an expandable rule, and if it's expandable outside of Chanukah, such that the Beis Yosef needs to put it in conversation with other halachot, it should definitely be expandable within Hilchos Chanukah. Okay, that's the basic structure of the argument. So then skip to the next paragraph. He says, "Va'od shashas atzmo kol mar shamu minolon dechashin l'chshada." He says the Gemara itself doesn't seem to limit it to one case. The Gemara itself, how does it present the halacha? How do you know they're worried about Chshad? It makes it sound like it's expandable, right? Because the Gemara introduces it with a rule from Peah, right? And it's a reflection about Chshad in general. They said, maybe he'll say that's different, because that's a shot on a biblical law. But he said, on the other hand, you might say that by Derabanan we're even more worried. Why are we more worried? Because some people who are careful about biblical law are less careful about rabbinic law. So there's even more reason to suspect. Yes, Jonathan. Yes.
Is it possible that override preventing other people in that it's like the lighting wants to actually kind of like a nice state like whatever.
Yeah.
But you can just put it on candle.
Correct.
So if you see that just lighting with one candle or repetition not the correct nickel zero right goes over zero and if you can't actually only light a candle.
So I wonder this, right, is that nowadays where everyone, right, candles are cheap, and everybody knows Mahadran and Mahadran, and every non-Jew on the street who's ever heard of Hanukkah knows that it's one per night, and, right, has watched the Maccabees candlelight video or something, I don't know, right, or whatever they've done, you know, whatever, or latke recipe, or saw them at the White House, I don't know, right? Or saw just the White House Hanukkah party, v'chule, right? Even though it's not always on Hanukkah, but whatever, not my problem, right? Sorry, it just brings back memories. It just, you don't understand how surreal it was when like the Maccabees, who were like YU's internal a cappella group, you know, posted this cutesy video before Hanukkah, and then 10 million people had watched it. It was very weird. Okay, like around YU, we were just like, what is happening? Right? And then they were on like, you know, on all these news, right, and talk shows, and like it was very weird. It was really weird. It really was. I just like every night, I would just like, you know, I'd come back to my dorm room, and my roommate was a soloist, and like we would just reflect on how weird it was getting, because it started like 100,000, and it was, you know, 1 million, and then it was 2 million, then it was 4 million. It was like, it was crazy. It was just like, it was insane. It was really weird. And then we got into the whole deal, and like, is it a kiyum persumei nisa? Is persumei nisa only in the formal halacha, or is it simply getting the miracle out there? And you know, very landish. This is what happens when you have like a, you know, he's both a rabbi and a singer. You know, can don chakiras and yeah. I forget who told me that did any of you have David Block as a teacher in Rambam, or he was? Did any of you have David Block as a teacher in Rambam? He was gone by your time. Oh well. Anyways, good memories of all that weirdness. Yes, I know, it's like celebrities. Yes, of course I know them. They're all like my contemporaries. Yes. What do you mean? They were like half of them were in Gush with me. All of them were in YU with me. Are you just saying I'm old? Like, I don't know what this is, you know? I know, they're my age. I'm aware how old they are. I mean, Chaim is a year older than me, and was Shana Bet when I was Shana Olive, you know. David and I were roommates, you know. But we were all, you know, we were all in YU together. Whoever's still part of it, right? Noe, yeah, my kids are like, Noe's nieces live behind us. Yes, we know. Like yes, David sang at my wedding. Like, you know. Yes, I know they're not old. I'm glad you don't think I'm old. That touches me. I feel old, right? I feel like sort of old, but sort of like the right age for my stage in life. You know, like some combination of that thing. You know, I feel like 32 is young to have 5 kids. That's like my cheshbon there. Fine. So then he quotes the Chacham Tzvi. Now, who's the Chacham Tzvi? Sorry, we got off track. What was the end of your question? Yes, that. Okay. Rewind. Where were we? Oh yeah, as I said, so I've wondered this before, which is nowadays that everybody in the world only knows Mahadran and Mahadran. So is there some chisaron, not just like it's less Mahadran, but is there a real chisaron b'shumei nisa when you don't light it? I wonder this. I don't know the answer. It's look, Shulchan Aruch basically presents Mahadran and Mahadran as a given. And I've wondered if that's part of what it is. If it's just that, you know, we really wanted to do it and candles were cheap by his time, or if like the way the reality we live in is that people, you know, basically that's what people know. So if you're not doing that, people are like, what is that thing? Right? Like if you put, you know, if you have 3 people in your family, so on the 8th night of Hanukkah you have 3 candles, right? Because you're doing Mahadran, right? Like there is, yes, I think Jews, non-Jews, everybody would just look and say, what is that? I mean, look, again, you have to remember, the candles used to be expensive, right? It wasn't the thing that, you know, the random Chabad guy on the corner of like, you know, at like Times Square gives you for free, right? Right? If you told the people in the Gemara, right? Remember the Gemara? says that Hanukkah is one of those things that you're supposed to sell the shirt off your back for. If you told those people who are selling the shirts off their back for Hanukkah candles that, oh, don't worry, in 1,500 years, if you just walk in the street, a rabbi will hand you a box with all the candles for Mahadran Min Mahadran for all of Hanukkah, and if you ask him for more, he'll just give you boxes and boxes, right? They would not know what you're talking about, right? Like, you have to remember that the qualitative edge we have over people who lived before, basically, the Industrial Revolution is, right, Eino Dome. Like, we just have no idea how wealthy we are in that sense. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I've wondered about this a lot, right? And I definitely think that practically there's a chisaron in Pirsumei Nisa if you don't do Mahadran and Mahadran nowadays. Whether that means it overrides the actual halacha, I can't say it does, right? Mahadran is still a thing, and right, Neru Shebeito is still a thing, and like people who are on like airplanes and are being Mekayim Hadlakat Nerud according to Rishon Zalman and turning on a flashlight, they usually only put on one, not like 8 flashlights.
I mean, I would think that, like, if you're running on the Mahadran, then, like, the rights are not sufficient.
I understand what you're saying. So is it, look, you're asking from the vantage point of Chshad, right? Like the general suspicion. It could be Chshad. I mean, it also could just be a lack in Pirsumei Nisa. I've wondered these questions. I don't have a good answer to them. I don't know. If someone finds something, let me know. I don't know. It seems intuitive that there should be some recognition of that reality. I would tell people nowadays that I really think that you should do Mahadran. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't do Mahadran and Mahadran on most, barring these weird cases on airplanes, right? Like, who doesn't do Mahadran and Mahadran? Like, it's so easy. It's so cheap. It's so... Yes, even if a goy would do Chanukah, he would do Mahadran, because he would also get a free box of candles from the Chabad guy. Yes, he would. What? So do mine. They do Christmas and Chanukah and a Hanami. Yeah, my cousins will light their Chanukah candles in front of the Christmas tree and a Hanami. I mean, my uncle is indeed Chayev, yes, but yeah, why not? Of course. I don't know what bracha you make on lighting the tree on fire. I don't know. I don't know. Right? I'll be Avodah Zarah. I don't know. I don't know. So it's not Avodah Zarah. It's just Narishkeit. I don't know. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's yeah, that thing too. By the way, can I just say something which you will all appreciate? 1 second. I found this out last night. Chaim Steinman posted it, and I didn't look at his post or relate it. This is totally not related to this, but it's hysterical because you guys like economics. This is a particularly weird economic fact. Apparently, do you know how sufganiyot became a thing? So apparently, the labor union, right, in Israel, the Stadrut, decided at some point that they wanted to create a culture of sufganiyot. Why sufganiyot? Because latkes people make at home, so it doesn't benefit the economy. But most people don't know how to make donuts. So if we make the Chanukah food sufganiyot, it will encourage people to go and support the economy by buying things that they can't make at home. I was like, wow, that is like, wow. Certain things are just like,
Economic fact after
yeah.
posted a entire paper that just said that the graph of like unemployment versus inflation looks similar to the shape of the island of Japan.
Okay, fine. That's fine. Yeah, I found this so shocking. I found this really quite astonishing of a fact. It does make, and it's so. Yes, but then, right, you have the really clever, right, but then there are the people who play on your need to do it yourself, right, because we all know that you like doing things yourself, right, so that's why, I don't know if they do this in America, but in Israel this is like a big thing, where they sell the donut with the filling not yet inside. They have a squeeze tube sticking out of the center with the filling so you can see it, and when you're ready to eat it, you squeeze the filling straight into the center with the squeeze tube, with it's like a pipette. It's like the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds. I'm not really sure. Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm really not a Sufganiya person. I don't love them. If I have to have I'll have, but I much more like the Sephardi version of it, which is even less healthy, which is a sphinge. So in Israel, a lot of people do sphingeim, because that's like the Sephardi version of it. Sphinge is basically, it's quoted in all the Sephardi poskim, because this was a big Sephardi thing, and there's a lot of Bishul Akum questions about them. But basically a sphinge is fried dough that after you fry it in dough, right, you just dunk it into sugar. And I don't know how many times you go back and forth in oil. It's just oil and sugar with enough flour to basically hold together fried sugar. It's really, really good. Last year for Aaron's Chanukah party, one of the parents, who's a professional baker and Sephardi, made fresh sphinges and brought them. They were unbelievably good, but you actually feel your heart, they're really good though. What? What? We're thinking of making them. Last night, Ara made the chocolate donuts, right? But sphingeim are so good. What? Oh, they're so good. You have no idea. Sphingeim are so good. My shul sends out cards with a Dvar Torah for every night and an activity per night because we're all still somewhat shut in our houses. So last night was a Dvar Torah and then a recipe for sphinges, and it's really just fry dough, cover in sugar, and fry again and then cover in sugar, Yes. Then go to gym and repeat. Yes. Fine. Anyways, back to the Shmot Yaakov. So the Shmot Yaakov then quotes the Chacham Tzvi. Who's the Chacham Tzvi?
Oh, he was not
Tzvi Hersh. Yes, very good. He lives in. And then he moves to. Very good. He moves to Amsterdam. Amsterdam is an interesting place because Amsterdam is where a lot of the people move after. Yes, after the Inquisition. Right. Germany. Or whatever it was then, I don't know. So there's a lot of interesting Ashkenazi Sephardi practices going on in Amsterdam. Ad hayom, right? Amsterdam has a lot of mixed practices because of this. So the Chacham Tzvi was also, he quotes, he asked, why do we care about Chshad at all? He said, why do you ask that here? Right? We have so many sugyas in Shas. Why here are you asking me, why do you care about Chshad? Isn't that a general rule? So what did he answer? So what does he say? Look, generally, we don't care so much about Chshad. We want you to judge people favorably. But where there's a reyuta, right, where there's something that would make you suspect, that's when we care about Chshad. So it's the kan b'ner Chanukah chayshin l'chshad l'chshad sheyasa mitzvah rak shelo aso min hamuvchar. Kevan the kan l'madak mevarach b'yom harishon shlosh bracha b'yom sheni shnayim v'aro mevarach b'yom rishon shnei bracha b'yom sheni bracha achat. V'kevan the aroa yotze gam gen midei chovat ner Chanukah the mitzvah min hamuvchar sheyat l'gvazim ken aroa shelo yadav betach Yomar Shuma Mikara Roim Daika Leitze Rak Viril Hadak Bazim Koshu Mitzvah Mukhar Al Zekar Minatim Khashin Chshad Kiyai. So we come up with this wild chiddush, which is we're not worried that you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. We're worried that someone will think that you decided not to light and instead to be Yotzei B'di'eved by looking at other people's menorahs, and the Gemara is asking, how do you know that we care that people might suspect you of doing the mitzvah in a b'di'eved fashion? Right? That's what he cares. And for that, he quotes Peah.
You're going to have to be worried you walk down the street, you're going to have people are going to have a shot, oh, no, you're not receiving it.
Oh, it's just very strange. And he says, etc. Atma din zela had to give us zaga shas li cholek vugam gen askam kol poskim the chadje of shivacham tzach shteiner bishum chshada. You know, I'd like by pitcha etc. V'kasha my chashin l'chshada yochon on l'dan l'chav zchut v'lo mardaf b'ha I'd like rav shekavta. And he says, but I don't understand. Why don't you just say that everyone will look and assume that your candle went out? Right? Right? He said, I don't understand the whole halacha. Why don't we just say that someone will come and not see a candle and assume that you lit it and went out? So he says, therefore, after vadishim kaptein zakukla mikol makom lo niach adayin boto makom kol zman ve'ed adloka noter min echanukah shel shava shel shemen chashin l'chshada shel edet klal v'zer raishin lo tshuva klal. So Shvut Yaakov has his whole tortured explanation to come up with the following conclusion, which is the fact that we assume that someone who sees your door without a candle won't just assume that you left the menorah, that you had a menorah there but it went out, proves that you must leave the oil there when it went out to avoid chshad. Okay? Now, let us analyze the Shvut Yaakov for a minute. Okay? Now, why would the Shvut Yaakov say this? So I can justify the Shvut Yaakov's position in, I think, two ways. Okay? One is to say, and I tend to think this is actually what he believes, is that, unlike what he quotes in the Chacham Tzvi, he thinks, right, based on the fact that his question was based on the brachot case, right, the shul case, that the chshad we're talking about here is universal. Okay? And therefore he says, look, once we know we're worried that you're not going to light the candles, so any possible case in which someone might doubt that you light the candles, you have to avoid that concern. But since that's the case, since this is just a universal rule of chshad, so therefore, you don't necessarily have to solve it by lighting the candle, right? You could solve it by leaving the candles that were blown out in place, right? Because if this is just a general problem of chshad, so then all you have to do is negate the chshad. So in the case of two doors, Chazal said do it with two candles. But when it goes out, so how do you solve the problem? By, leaving the candles. And because, look, in the end of the day, it's about concern. This isn't local to Chanukah. And if it's not local to Chanukah, so then, however you do it. So if you want to solve the problem by leaving the menorah there, do that. I could imagine that he would also say you could put up a sign. Lit candles, went out, kafta in zakukla. I assume he would think that would work too, right? I would assume. Right? That's my guess. Right? So that's my best guess. Now, I would note that the Chacham Tzvi doesn't seem to go in this direction, because the Chacham Tzvi seems to say that by Chanukah, we're not just worried that you did an Avera, we're worried that you didn't do the mitzvah in the best way. That already seems to suggest that this is a localized halacha to Chanukah. Because I don't know if you care about that everywhere or only in certain types of cases. I don't know. Yes, Jonathan, what's, right? Very good. So now, right, Yohanan asked the question I wanted him to ask, which is, if my analysis of Shvut Yaakov is right, then why couldn't you basically do the same thing when you had two entrances? In one entrance, light a menorah, and the other, put up a sign and says, I lit menorah on the other side. If you want to see a menorah, right, go straight and left. Right? What? So either you give a technical answer and say they'll lie, right, you're lying, or you say, look, it's a formal takana, right, at the end of the day, or whatever it might be. I don't know. But you're right. That is the big question on a formulation like the Shvut Yaakov, because the Shvut Yaakov basically seems to think that both halachot are generic chshad, and therefore all you really have to do is avoid concern. So either he thinks that you're allowed to put a sign that says my menorah is that way, or he thinks that in that particular case Chazal formulated it, but I don't really know why, right? Or like Rami's saying, people will still suspect you of saving on the candles by putting up a neon sign instead. I don't know, right? It's problematic, right? Okay. Formulation 2, though, okay? Formulation 2 would be, let's say, right, you believed like Adam. Let's say you believed like Adam, and you said that this halacha of Chshad is not a universal halacha of Chshad. It's a local one to Chanukah because Chanukah, pursuing Nisa, is so central, right? So then, what might that lead you to believe about the Kafta Zakukla case? Right? If you think that pursuing Nisa motivates how we keep Hilchos Chanukah, then you might go farther than Shvus Yaakov. And what might you say? What the Beis HaLevi says. What does the Beis HaLevi say? Look at the Beis HaLevi next door. It's with the arrow. See where there's a finger pointing? Look here. No, they did. He says, no, I'm going to go farther than the Shvus Yaakov, and I'm going to tell you, when the Gemara says that you don't have to relight the candle, what does it mean? You don't have to relight the candle from the vantage point of Hadlakat Nerot, but you actually do have to relight the candles. Mishum Chshad. You actually have to relight. Right? Below pliga haka rak beikar chiyav mitzvah. Their only argument, the mitzvah itself. There are v'huna svir le rak shu chashuch muchrach l'takno. Sorry. There are mitzvah chuyav lachshal adlika disvir l'chein atakana shei dollar kol meshach hazman kolo dafka. Rav Huna thinks that the halacha is that the candle should be lit. Ulididei gambod aner dalok ikar mitzvah v'chashin neshama yiv. Sorry, I keep skipping. Rakshu chashuch muchar l'takno. Davkav lekach Chshad over. Makir bo shu dalok mikvar. Mikol makam mechuyev l'takno mishum ikar mitzvah v'chashin yiv sha'az. He thinks it's fundamental to the mitzvah. V'rav Chizda svir le mishum ikar mitzvah ein zakuk la. Umemela calls manjul against arach l'takno. Daleka chishada. He thinks that is not part of the intrinsic mitzvah. The minkar the mekodem dalok ogen aval kshavar kava moda de tarchlach lika mishum chshada. He says, but when it goes out, you actually have to relight it. Right? You actually have to relight it. Everyone agrees you have to relight it because of Chshad. Now he notes the poskim don't say this. Right? But the Beis HaLevi, right, goes this far as to say, now what would motivate the Beis HaLevi to say something like that? So I could see two reasons to say that, right? One is to say, it's the general view of Chshad, right? It's the general view of Chshad, so yeah, any reason that you're suspect, you have to solve the problem. The only difference is that the Shvus Yaakov thinks you have to leave the menorah there, and he goes farther and says you have to light it. But I would say the Beis HaLevi makes more sense to go with what Adam said yesterday and to solve Yonatan's problem, which is, no, this isn't the general of Chshad. What is it? It's a localized halacha in Chshad because of Brisumei Nisa. And if that's the case, that it's a localized halacha, so it's not enough to solve the Chshad problem. How do you solve the Chshad problem? By doing the normal Maisa Mitzvah. What's the normal Maisa Mitzvah? Lighting the menorah. Right? And therefore, the Beis HaLevi, in a certain sense, makes a lot more sense to the Shvus Yaakov, because he says, yes, there's Chshad, but whenever there's Chshad, how do you solve it? By lighting a menorah, because it's internal. But now, finally, I get back to Rami's point, which is, okay, but let's say that I really believe that the Chshad concern by Adlaka Ner Chanukah is localized. But I still want to say that the only case in which you light a second menorah is when you have a second doorway, but not like the Beis HaLevi, that if it goes out, you don't have to relight. Why would you say that? Can anyone justify that particular formulation? Gavi, what do you think? Right? How could you justify saying that on the one hand, this is a localized concern of Chshad because of right, the nature of the mitzvah, right? And yet still think that it's only true in the case where you have two doors, but not true in the case of Kafta Zakukla. Can you come up with a conceptual reason for that particular formulation? Right? Are we clear so far on what we've seen? Right? We've seen the Shvuz Yaakov who seems to think that this is a general Chshad, and therefore you don't need a light. You can just basically put up a sign, which for him is leaving your burnt out menorah. The problem with that, obviously, is why can't you solve your two doorway case that way? The Beis HaLevi seems to solve that problem by saying, oh, no, by Kafta Zakukla, yes, in terms of the mitzvah itself, you don't have to relight, but you do have to relight mitzvah Chshad. Why? Presumably because of what Adam said, that the Chshad here is a function for Tumei Nisa, and every time there's a Chshad, you solve it by lighting a menorah. And therefore, he says, you have a second entrance, light a menorah. Your candles go out, even though you don't have to mitzad the mitzvah, mishum Chshad, light it again. Right? But how could you say that the Chshad here is internal, and nevertheless, it only applies to the case where we have two entrances, but not to the case where where Kafta in Zakukla, where it goes out, and you would, in fact, say you don't have to relight it all. No, it's the position that you've been saying the whole time, Rami.
No, I never said. I was saying like that.
Okay, I'm going to try this again, Rami. What you said is channeling the Rav. Now do you feel better?
Land.
Well, almost. It's not land, but it's house. House. Right? The Rav tries to defend that position by saying the following. He says, look, it is true that the obligation to light in both entrances is a localized concern to Chanukah, and this isn't the general rule of Chshad. However, when Chazal made the takana, they don't just randomly say, look, every time you're concerned that someone might possibly think that you're not being in the mitzvah, you have to do it. Right? You have to do something to dispel that. Because then you get into what Yehonatan says. Well, what if people don't know that there's such a thing as Neri Shubeto or Mahadran? Does that mean I have to light Mahadran and Mahadran? I'm not Makayim the mitzvah at all nowadays if I don't do Mahadran and Mahadran? Meaning, are you going to say that because it's all about perception and therefore I have to, right? Or, right, V'chulei, right? How far are you going to have to go? Are you going to really say that, look, Pirsume Nisa drives everything we think about Chanukah, and therefore any concern will completely change the nature of the halacha, right? The Rav says, look, I respect the sentiment, but that's a bit too far-fetched. So therefore, what the Rav argues is the following. Yes, it's a localized halacha of Chshad, but when Chazal set up the localized concern of Chshad, they modeled it after the Iker mitzvah of Hadlakas Neros Chanukah. And what is the Iker mitzvah of Hadlakas Neros Chanukah? No. That's the rationale. But what's the surah? What's the form of the mitzvah? What's the minimum number of candles you can light? One per what? No, per bayit. Ner ish uveito. One per house, per household. The Rav says, Ner Ishu Beito proves that the nature of Neros Chanukah devolves on the house. Right? Devolves on the house. And therefore, he said, when Chazal were entertaining Chshad, they did the following. They said, if the basic obligation of Neros Chanukah devolves on the house, so then we're going to be worried about Chshad only in what cases? Meaning what? If there's a second doorway which is going to lead someone to believe that someone else lives there. And there's a missing basic unit of Adlakas Neros Chanukah. So what we're saying is the Iker Chiyuv is on one per house. The expansion Mishum Chshad is on every doorway, which people might assume belongs to a separate house. Right? What we do is we model the Chshad as an expansion of the Iker Chiyuv. If the Iker Chiyuv is on the house, then the Chshad expansion is only in cases where the Chshad emerges from people suspecting that there's an entire household unit that's missing a menorah. But we can't just start chasing down every possible psychological doubt that people have. Because then you end up with the Shvuz Yaakov, which is, oh, well, maybe it went out, so I have to leave the menorah in there. Or you end up with Yehonatan. Well, nowadays, people only know Madrim and Hadrin, so you're not allowed to light anything less than Madrim and Hadrin because people think you're lighting something besides your Chanukah candles. He says, therefore, yes, Chshad is localized, but it's localized to cases where we can basically expand the idea of what a house is. The Iker Chiyuv is on a house and a household. The expansion is on a doorway, which people might think belongs to another household, right, to another house structure. But random ancillary chshados, right, this isn't what Adam said yesterday, that Pirsuma Nisa drives everything, and therefore we have to be overly concerned on Chanukah because of Chshad. We only do it in ways that formally resemble the way we set up the Iker Chiyuv. And therefore, at every doorway, which resembles a house, you light a candle. But random concerns like kafta and zakukla, which are just there, you don't worry about it. Now, I'll just add one point, and then I'll take your question, Yohantan. This requires more analysis because there is a very big deal in poskim whether, in fact, ner ishu beito means house or household. The nafka mina being that the poskim argue, what happens if you don't live in a house? Are you obligated in menorah? Some poskim say yes, because Neruv Esho Beito doesn't really mean house, it means household. And therefore, even if you're sleeping under the stars, you just have a menorah where you are. Other poskim say no, Ner Esho Beito really means that the obligation devolves on the house. And therefore, you don't have a house, you can't light. Right? And this is a machlokes haposkim, which is, I can't get into for now, but this is really a major machlokes haposkim. Yes, Jonathan. Okay.
Would a person outside of a house, or in a house, but by them living by themselves, count as an household and have one menorah?
I don't understand the question.
So that's it's either on the house or the household.
Yeah.
Does a person count as a household themselves?
Yeah, presumably, right? You're your own household, right? The question of whether you can be assimilated into a household where you don't live is an interesting question, right? That's part of the machlokes haposkim, but whether you guys actually have to light or you can be yotze with your parents because you're still part of their household, right? This, there are poskim who say that it's really just about household, and therefore, even though you're in a different house, you're assimilated back into your parents, right? Other poskim say, no, you're living thousands of miles away. It doesn't matter that you're supported by them. Chanukah is more about a living space, right? By the? Yeah.
I sent it to my Jabim to
Yeah.
Right, but what do you want? 1 to 6?
So you got to be louder because I have a conversation going on behind me too. Okay, right. So here I think even the Rav would have to admit to something like by Chanukah we're more sensitive because of Persumei Nisa or something like that. What? What do you mean? So that's what so that's why you'd have to say that it's something like you have to, it's a combination of the Chshad, Pirsumei Nisa, formulated in such a way that it resembles the Iker Takana. No, I understand. You have to say something like that. Now the Rav gets into some nuances which I don't want to get into in terms of how exactly this plays out, but that's his basic thesis, which as much as Rami said, what does that have to do with land? The answer is, basically he's saying yes. right? That it's not stam that we care about Chshad and pursuing needs, is that we care about it insofar as we can inhere that concern into a tangible, right, reflection of a living space, right? Because then it at least mimics the Ikar Halacha. Okay, that's the Rav's way of squaring this. Okay, we've basically dealt with all the fundamental issues, but we still have one more day to it, because I do want to, right, the two questions that are left are, one is the comparison to the shul issue, which is very quick. The other one, which I do find interesting, because I think to tie it all is, do we do this nowadays, right? And that, I mean, both in places where you still light in the windows, and what about in places where you no longer light in the windows, right? But you've gone back to lighting outside. Do we have to worry about Chshad? Because, again, I don't know most Israelis who, even those Israelis who light in their, right, outside, who care about Chshad, right? Ray Ginsburg is so far the only other person I've met who, like me, actually cares about Chshad and lights at multiple entrances, right? But that might be telling that we are the only people that I know of who do that, right? You know, and I mean, look, if someone told me that the Brisker Rav did this, I wouldn't be surprised, because the Brisker Rav had all types of interesting chumras on Chanukah, like he was machmir that tichel regel menashok didn't mean, right, until like half an hour. It meant until people actually leave. And he apparently had this minhag. There was a movie theater behind his house, and he would fill his menorah with enough oil until it was half an hour after the last movie let out, because he figured that was tichla regel menashuk where he lived. So he had all that. So if someone told me the Brisker Rav lit at every entrance like that, I would not be surprised, right? But I don't know most people who do it, so I do want to flesh it out a little bit and then be done. Okay? And since tomorrow is the last day before Chanukah break, it doesn't make sense to start a new Bava Basra Sugya, so let's just flesh out the things here. I think that makes the most sense. And then next week, we decided we're going to Chaf Aleph, right? Both the education system and the competition figure that hold off, right? Okay. And then we do have to do the third parak at some point. We do. It's really, we have to. It's like the classic yeshiva parak, and it's great. We do have to at least touch some sugyas there. I know we haven't gotten there yet. Yes, Yonan, you have the last word.